Well, thank you guys so much for being here tonight. So my name is Katie, and I work at the Sacramento Public Library, where books are just the beginning. Thank you for joining us for Better Sleep Tips. We're so excited to offer this program and to have local clinical psychologist and educator, Dr. Lori Roberto, with us today. Before we get started, I wanted to mention a few things. So first is that this program is made possible through a grant from the National Network of Libraries of Medicine and is intended to help you learn techniques for mindful and heart-healthy living. There's some great information available about the role that sleep plays in your health on the National Health, Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute page. So you'll find information about signs of sleep deficiency, how much sleep is recommended for your age, and how to discuss sleep concerns with your doctor. So I'm going to leave a link to that in the chat for you guys to check out after the program. So also, this program is being recorded and it's going to be shared on our YouTube channel, which you can find under Sacramento Public Library, in case you would like to refer to it later or share it with a friend. So, who's ready to get started? I know I am. So, to kick things off, we're going to start with the screening of Night After Night, a short film from TakeCare.org. TakeCare is a national campaign that invites people to take care of their whole health, mind, body, spirit, and community. In Night After Night, follow one woman's battle with insomnia and her journey to a good night's sleep. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that video. I've seen it many times and it's enjoyable every single time I watch it. I discover something a little new and different every time I watch it. So as you can see, getting a good night's sleep is important to your health. And even if you deal with insomnia, there are so many different ways to address it, as you saw in the film. Our guest, Dr. Lori Roberto, is here to expound on why sleep matters, how to create a better sleep pattern, and share strategies on how to calm your mind and body. We'll do a short Q&A at the end of the program, so feel free to ask your questions in the chat. I'll be checking it out all evening. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Dr. Roberto.
Okay, thank you. I'm so pleased to be here. Let's see, I'm not muted, so that's good. And I'm going to be sharing my screen. So is it okay if I go ahead and do that now, Katie?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Super. So, okay. You can let me know. Okay. Hopefully that's as we practiced.
Looks good.
Looks good? Okay, super. Well, thank you for being here tonight. I too have watched that video several times. And so as we begin right now, perhaps just allow yourself to kind of settle in. You may have some thoughts going through your own mind. You may notice some sensations in your body. Maybe that was something that you really related to, or maybe it was kind of new and brought up some new things. So we'll just sit with that as we start. And I wanted to begin with talking about why sleep matters. The fact that you're all here tonight with us would suggest that you do agree that sleep matters. And sleep has been one of those interesting phenomenon that we can understand and describe, and we understand that it's very powerful and necessary, and yet there's still some mystery to it. We can relate to the idea that sleep is restorative. We all can relate to the notion of feeling physically restored, mentally and cognitively restored, as well as being sharp and alert. We know what it feels like when we don't sleep. You know, akin to what the lady in the video was talking about. We know, and we now think very broadly about sleep. We think about sleep as being an essential component of our health, and sleep promotes health, and not sleeping can promote some difficulties and problems. So just a few that you may or may not be familiar with. For those of you that are making New Year's intentions to lose weight, getting good sleep can help you to regulate and even to lose weight. We also know that sleep can reduce the risk of heart disease and diabetes. And some of this is due to the role of cortisol, glucose metabolism that occurs when we sleep. We also know that sleep promotes and supports a healthy immune system. And there's even a very interesting study that's spoken about in a really good TED Talk. I'll put a link to that in some of the information that you have about how sleep really is related to our immune functioning. We also know, and you probably can relate to the fact that sleep promotes positive mood status and well-being. And likewise, not sleeping can promote stress and distress and depression, that sort of thing. Sleep is also essential for learning and memory. As an educator, I'm always talking to my students about the role of sleep because we know a lot of people, and especially young adults, sometimes don't think about sleep as important, but we know that it helps to consolidate our memories. And so it's very helpful for learning. Sleep is also essential for safety. We know that there's a lowered risk of accidents and safety when we sleep well, and there's a higher incidence of accidents when we don't. So I'm just going to very briefly touch bases on the notion of what is sleep. We understand how to measure sleep, and what you're seeing on this slide is examples of brainwave activity that reflect the different stages of sleep. And when we're sleeping, we have characteristic breathing and heart rate shifts, as well as shifting of our body temperature throughout the night, and our brain changes. So what you're seeing at the top is the alert awake brain. And interestingly enough, as we go through sleep, we go into lighter stages of sleep. And then as we move down this graph, you'll see these bigger stages. These are called delta slow wave sleep. And then at the very bottom of the graph, this looks a lot like the awake mind. This is dream sleep or REM sleep, rapid eye movement. And it's a very interesting sleep state that we go in throughout the night. Now, I just want to highlight normal sleep. As we sleep, we start with our brain awake and we start to slip into the lighter stages, stage 1 and 2 of sleep. Awake is not on this graph, but this is essentially showing sleep cycles. So imagine that wake is maybe somewhere here, and we drift down into sleep and we go into the deeper stages of sleep. Then we go back up through the lighter stages of sleep, and then finally we go to REM sleep. So what's noteworthy is each of these discrete periods are known as sleep stages or sleep cycles. And they generally last about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And most people go through 4 to 5 cycles a night if you're a normal or average sleeper. We get more of our deep sleep early in the night. That's reflected by this purple lines. And as the night progresses, we get more periods of REM sleep or dream sleep. So that's why we're more likely to remember our dreams in the morning. One of the things that's noteworthy, especially for people that have sleep problems, and I like to highlight, is it's normal and it's actually physiologically adaptive for us to have momentary moments of awakening. And sometimes we even come to full awakening. And this can happen at any point in these cycles. But we often go from a stage of light sleep in and out of wakefulness. So we can think of this as normal and adaptive versus imagining that we must sleep through the night without awakening. So let's think about what gets in the way of sleep. And I just want to invite each of you to think about this for a moment for yourself. You might think back to the video that we just saw. You might think about what are the sleep robbers, I like to call them sleep robbers, that are in your life. And just try to identify one or two. This is some of the more common ones, and these are things that we want to be mindful of as we're addressing sleep issues. But certainly I would say one of the primary ones that I hear about is stress and just busyness, our busy life that goes on at all times of day and night, demands. We may, and many of us often have changing schedules. We don't simply go to bed when it's dark and wake up when it's light. Our schedule is unique. And so sometimes it changes depending on the season or depending on our work or other life demands. Alcohol or caffeine. This is one that I invite people to really think about, the role of alcohol or caffeine. If we think about that sleep graph that we just saw, while alcohol can help us to essentially fall asleep because it's a sedative, it can actually fragment our sleep. So we can have momentary awakenings throughout the night due to alcohol. Likewise, caffeine can also fragment our sleep, but as you know, caffeine can also make it harder for us to fall asleep. So we have to be mindful of substances as well. Animals or noise. Can any of you relate to this picture of the little doggy in the covers? I have a little dog and we kennel him, but in the morning when he goes out to the bathroom, he comes back in and hides in the covers. So for many people that can be comforting, but it could also be a sleep robber. And sometimes that's a hidden one. Aha, technology. So this is one that I imagine most of you thought of when you think about what are the things that can get in the way, particularly of putting ourselves to bed in the evening. Cell phones, laptop, TV, video games, on and on. So let's talk a little bit more about sleep and stress, which is really pertinent right now, given our times, given living through our pandemic, given all the political discord that's going on. A lot of people are experiencing a lot of uncertainty. And humans, we don't like uncertainty. We like to know what's happening. And so that activates our worry thoughts, that activates our minds. We want to figure things out. When we're stressed, we also have an activation of what's known as our sympathetic nervous system. And so our basic physiology has built-in stress response called fight or flight, which probably you've all heard of. And this activation of a sympathetic nervous system when we're stressed is really adaptive and very, very helpful in the short term. But in the long term, it can be really harmful and really harmful for our bodies, certainly harmful for our sleep. As we're more stressed, we sometimes have behavioral changes. And so that's what I mean by activity and behavior changes. Think about when you're stressed, are you living your healthiest life? Do you stay up too late doom scrolling and watching the news? Do you have more of a tendency for stress eating? Or maybe even a little bit more alcohol use or other drug or substances. So it becomes a little harder to self-care. And because health and sleep are so interconnected, stress is really a problem for sleep. The number one sleep problem, and probably why we're doing this particular video, is insomnia is really the number one sleep problem. And up to about 50% of Americans, this statistic, I see it everywhere from 30 to 50%. But if we just think about symptoms of insomnia, that's really quite common. And so what we mean by insomnia is difficulty falling asleep, difficulty staying asleep, early morning awakening, or simply poor sleep quality. About 10 to a third of individuals experience more chronic or persistent insomnia, which is typically defined as 3 months or greater. So because it's such the number one sleep problem and so common, it's one of the most common complaints that people go to their primary care physicians for. This is well known, and in fact, I do often encourage people to go and talk to their doctors as well as to have a medical workup if needed. So let's talk about the paradox of insomnia. And I think the paradox was really highlighted by this video that we just saw. Did you notice when she said she tried everything? I heard things like counting sheep. I learned how to relax all the parts of my body, and I would go through it 14 times. Nothing helped. She tried Ambien, she tried, right? Therein lies the paradox of insomnia, right? Because the more sometimes we try, the harder it gets to sleep, because we can't make ourselves sleep. We can't make anybody sleep. And in fact, often the harder we try, the more aroused, activated our minds get, the more hyperarousal we get or stress response in our body. And in fact, there's also a problem of hypervigilance. And that is sort of that notion of paying too much attention to what's going on. Will I sleep? Am I sleeping? Um, I think I'm almost asleep now. Wait, now I'm having a difficult thought or a bad thought. So we get a problem of hyperarousal and hypervigilance. So when I talk to people about sleep, I like to sort of sometimes think about it as, how do we create the conditions where sleep is possible? And sleep might be, even encouraged, but not trying to force sleep. And those of you that have children or babies know this well, right? We can't force sleep. Just trying to keep mindful of my time. Before we talk about some ideas and strategies to improve your sleep, I just want to identify when it could be really helpful to consult either medical or psychological care. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are some of the highlighted things that I think could be very important for you to rule out any medical factors or to seek additional psychological help. So one of the number one issues would be signs of sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is another common sleep disorder that is known as a sleep breathing problem. And so some of the signs of sleep apnea would be actually having somebody notice that you stop breathing temporarily. And often upon, usually this when you stop breathing in your sleep, you're deep in your brain, it wakes you up and it says, breathe, breathe. So that's why some people, when they're having sleep apnea episodes, they'll wake up gasping or choking or feeling like they're trying to breathe. Also, people with sleep apnea often are heavy snorers. You don't have to be a heavy snorer to have sleep apnea. Some people just have light snoring, but that's something. Snoring is also one of those risk factors. There's also disruptive sleep behaviors, and this would be another area where you might want to get evaluated by a physician who can help evaluate, is there something behaviorally going on that's disrupting your sleep? Examples of this might be restless legs. There's something called restless leg syndrome and periodic limb movement disorder, where literally the legs or the limbs might feel highly restless, maybe kind of creepy crawly sensations, or maybe kicking, that sort of thing. There's also more complex sleep behaviors that can occur called parasomnias. And examples of these would be sleepwalking or sleep eating, literally where you're sleepwalking or eating in a state of sleep, not fully awake. Many of us do these things, especially when we're little. Sleepwalking is pretty common. As we get older, we tend to grow out of those. So that might be an area to look into further. Also, I would encourage anybody who's having a chronic or a severe insomnia, especially if it's causing a lot of distress or if it's interfering with your functioning. There's definitely help that you can receive for this. There's also sleep schedule disruptions, and we call these circadian rhythm sleep-wake disorders. And this is simply where your sleep pattern is not really compatible with, say, your ideal sleep pattern. This could be somebody that maybe is a night owl, but it goes to the extreme. And so maybe you're not going to bed till 3 in the morning, and then you're sleeping until, I don't know, noon the next day. So that's just an example where somebody's schedule is off. We don't necessarily consider that a problem if it's not a problem for the person. So certainly if that works for you, then that's not necessarily a problem. But if your sleep cycle is off, that could be a reason for seeking additional help. Another reason would be if you're experiencing depression, anxiety, or stress that's impacting your sleep, because it's the chicken versus the egg phenomenon. So those things impact sleep, and sleep can actually increase and make those more apparent. Some people might find that they're turning to substances or needing medicines almost on a nightly basis. And especially if you're having concern about overuse, or if you're simply concerned about reliance on medicines for sleep, that might be reason to seek medical consultation. And then finally, when medical issues impact your sleep, and a good example of this would be pain. We would want to get the pain as under control as possible um, to improve sleep quality. So let's talk about how to create a better sleep pattern. All right. So I'm going to talk about three main considerations. We're going to talk about sleep habits, and you often see this talked about as sleep hygiene. We're going to talk about your body and ultimately ways to calm your body and your mind and calm negative thoughts and emotions. Now, as a clinical health psychologist, I certainly don't see the mind and the body as separate. I see them as highly interconnected. But for the sake of talking about this, I'm going to kind of separate it out. So sleep habits. So one of the primary things that can be very helpful is a regular schedule. Now, if you have a significant insomnia problem, we don't want to go about this in a highly rigid manner, but consistency can be really helpful, especially if your sleep-wake pattern is off. Finding some regularity to either going to sleep or waking up is really helpful. And if that feels kind of overwhelming, then I suggest starting with one or the other. Usually I suggest starting with a wake up time and trying to have a consistent wake up time. Limiting daytime naps. Naps are neither good nor bad, and naps can be really helpful, especially shorter naps, especially not too late in the day. So just be mindful and limit naps. And again, think about what bedtime transition could be useful for you. Now, everybody's different. Some people can, and most people with insomnia know at least one person that can just jump into bed, turn out the lights, they close their eyes, and boom, they're asleep. But a lot of people need a period of transition. So I invite you to think about what way are you promoting and giving signals to your mind and to your body that it's getting close to bedtime. That this might include practices, simply, getting ready for bed. It could include something calming. There's no right or wrong way to do this. We also want to think about positive sleep environment. And this would include things like your cozy bed, the pets, trying to put them away if possible. Ideally, humans tend to sleep best in cooler temperatures. So while we want our body to be warm, it's nice when our room can be on the cooler side. That actually promotes better sleep. So let's talk a little bit about things for your body. Now, if we go back to the concept of sleep and health being interconnected, when we're talking about what to do for your body, we're not just talking about what to do at night, right? Sleep, we can think about this just like the woman in the video said, I want to think about myself as a whole person and think about your whole life. And so really, when we're thinking about sleep, we're thinking about the whole experience of your life. So one of the things that can be really helpful, and it can be also helpful for establishing a routine, is to get morning light. The signals our circadian rhythm, the parts of our body that are registering daytime, activate right? That's why we start to dim things at night. Ideally, we would all do exercise for health purposes, right? So exercise isn't just great for sleep, it's great for everything. It's great for mood, it's great for stress management. For some people, it's really important to exercise earlier in the daytime. Some people, there's always some people that can exercise right up until the moment they go to bed. But for some people, that's too overstimulating of the body. And also their body then becomes too overheated. So consider exercising earlier in the day. Consider also limiting your stimulants, caffeine, of course, nicotine, anything like that. And consider limiting alcohol and heavy food before bed, because we don't want to augment the natural waking that we have throughout the night. We don't want to fragment our sleep. I would challenge you, and this is always hard for my undergraduate students, many of them choose a health behavior change project, and a lot of them choose sleep. And one of the things that is really helpful is figuring out a way to put away your cell phone or TV or electronics, whatever hooks you in, and trying to set that aside a certain period of time before bed. Again, what you need is what you need, and you'll have to sort of explore that. But along with putting those away, you might consider starting to dim your lights, maybe even, creating a nice sleep environment. So I like to introduce the notion of relaxation and stretching and breathing exercises, but I don't want to give the idea that these are simply for use in bed or at night. That's why the woman, in the video talked about nothing helped. All this counting of sheep and relaxing parts of her body, because she was using that to try to force herself to sleep, right? So what we want to do is we want to try to train our bodies to learn how to relax, to learn how to calm down, to bring down that sympathetic activation of our nervous system, and to engage what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, or our relaxation response. So there's many, many ways to do this, and I want to introduce a skill. So one of the skills that I'm going to introduce is a simple breath practice called Foursquare or box breathing. And this is one that I like for a number of reasons. Most of you have heard about essentially diaphragmatic breathing, where we're using kind of our belly to breathe, not just our chest. Box breathing or Foursquare breathing is good because it keeps your mind occupied. And so for people that have a very busy mind and find it hard to simply relax and not really think about anything per se, it gives them something concrete to focus on. So here's how box breathing goes. So box breathing is you're breathing into a count, and then you're holding that for the same count. You're exhaling for the same count, and then you do a second hold. So if you think about that, that creates a box. So you're breathing in, hold, then breathing out, then hold, right? So I like to suggest to the count of 4. That helps us to remember Foursquare or box breathing. So I'm going to try a little beat. I don't know if it'll be too fast or too slow. Just try to breathe along with me. Let's start with an exhale. Okay, exhale. Now breathe in and hold. Exhale. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Breathe in. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale and hold. 2, 3, 4. Breathe in. 2, 3, 4. Hold. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Breathe in. Hold. Hold. Breathe in. Hold. And hold. Good. Okay. That is box breathing. That may have not worked for you, or it may have been really interesting. If you were in one of my classes, I might be really curious to hear what you experience that like in your own body. What I would encourage you to do, because always the first time we're trying to learn something new, it feels new and different and sometimes quite awkward. And my pace may have been completely not the ideal pace for you. So I'd encourage you to practice that, not just in bed and not just at night, but throughout the day, a couple of different times. And just think about it as a little way to activate your relaxation response. So that's breath practice. Let's talk about the mind. So remember the woman in the video. Remember what she said. Your mind is causing the problems, and it's your mind that can get you over the problems. Now, one of the things, and this is classic for insomnia, that she said is my mind doesn't turn off. And this is something I hear very, very often when I work with people with insomnia. There's no one step like, here's what you do to calm your mind. There's many, many ways to calm your mind. And we're going to just talk about a few. So one of the ones that we just talked about is that putting away of the TV or the phone or the electronics. So any way that you can sort of reduce your input to your mind, your stimulation or that overactivation, that'll help calm your mind. Another thing that's really interesting, and I learned about this not too long ago, is that some people like to practice mindfulness or even a gratitude practice before bed. And some researchers actually decided to study this, and they asked subjects to practice a form of gratitude right before they went to bed. And what they found was that it improved both the sleep quality and the sleep quantity. So it was really helpful as well. I like to think of it as sort of priming your brain. So many people with sleep concerns, they start worrying about sleep. And so if we can start shifting into maybe a practice of gratitude or something else positive right before bed, that's one way. Another way is to practice mindfulness. And again, the key is we can't try too hard. So when I like to think about teaching mindfulness, I think of it as a gentle observing of your thoughts, as well as your feelings and sensations. And so let's talk about what this would be. And I'm going to invite you right now to practice what I call a mindful pause. And the way I like to remember this is to use the acronym STOP. So the S stands for stop and pause. So let's just stop and pause. And now take a breath. And as you exhale, just observe. Just notice really what you're experiencing right now in your body. Notice the thoughts that you've been having as I've been talking. Maybe just notice and identify the emotions that you're feeling right now. And then P stands for proceed. That could simply be, okay, I took a mindful pause and now I'm going to, maybe I'm cooking. I'm going to take a mindful pause, hopefully not while the heat is at too high. And then I proceed. Or that P can really stand for a number of things. It might stand for practice a skill. That skill could be breath work, or it could be yoga practice. It could be anything. The other thing, and I know I'm getting close to the time that I need to end, but I want to introduce the notion of negative sleep thoughts. This is another thing that is very, very common with insomnia. Now, there's a number of categories of what we sometimes think of as dysfunctional or unhelpful thoughts. I'm just going to highlight a couple that are very common. So one category is what we call all or nothing thoughts. An example of this is I never sleep well, right? So it's sort of saying I always or I never sleep well. Catastrophizing. This is something that often we do when we're worried about something. We sort of anticipate maybe the worst scenario. So an example for sleep is if I don't sleep tonight, I won't be able to work at all tomorrow. I won't be able to function, something along those lines. Another common unhelpful thought is what we call labeling. And that labeling is like putting a label upon ourselves. I'm a bad sleeper. Think about what calling yourself a bad sleeper does to your mind, to your energy, over and over. Think about that sense of trying too hard that we've been talking about. Think about that sense of must and the intensity of that. I must go to sleep now. Sometimes as you're preparing for bed, the intensity of, oh, I hope, or I must, I need to. So that can intensify that over arousal, that anxiousness and worry. Or something that we might call fortune telling. It's sort of predicting the future. I had a bad night last night, so I'll probably sleep terribly tonight too. So that's just an example of a few negative sleep thoughts that we want to try to be mindful of. And here's a couple of strategies. First of all, I encourage all of you to be gentle with your own mind and your thoughts. So first of all, let's just notice the negative thought. When we have a negative thought, it's not a huge concern for alarm, but we simply kind of want to notice it. That's the first step, creating self-awareness. A second step might be what we call, this is part of cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, where we might identify a more realistic or an alternative thought. So I was going to go back. So if we say, I never sleep well, a more realistic thought might be, some days I sleep well and some days I don't sleep well. So just an alternative, maybe a more realistic. Maybe with catastrophizing, it could be, well, even if I don't sleep well tonight, I'll somehow manage to get through the day tomorrow. So it's just a slight way of sort of shifting our thoughts. A third possibility is more along the lines of noticing and moving towards acceptance, knowing that we all have negative thoughts from time to time, and simply maybe creating a little distance between the thought, I'm such a bad sleeper. Well, instead of simply having that thought, maybe saying, my mind is telling me that I'm a bad sleeper. My mind is having this unhelpful thought right now. Or I notice my mind is putting pressure on myself right now, saying I must sleep tonight. So that's just an example of a way that we can be gentle with our mind, notice the thought, and try to create a little distance. It kind of helps to settle our mind down, and it helps to settle our body down. So in conclusion, I'm going to just identify a couple of the summary points, the key points. So hopefully you're all believers now of the need to prioritize sleep. And if you have any questions about that, I really highly encourage you to watch a wonderful TED Talk called Sleep is Your Superpower by Dr. Matthew Walker. He's at UC Berkeley. It can be also a little alarming because he does highlight some of the health effects, but hopefully all of us will learn to prioritize our sleep. Secondly, we've identified some sleep habits that can be helpful, that can promote sleep. Everything from creating a routine or creating a consistent sleep-wake schedule. I would encourage all of you, can you choose one action step based on anything that you've heard tonight or any ideas that you've had in your own mind? And maybe commit to that. Maybe commit to that just for 1 week and test it out and see what that's like for you. And then lastly, I want to just encourage you all, just like the woman in the video said, there's so many things. And that's the beauty of this. There's actually many, many practices that can be helpful. I would encourage you to playfully explore, to be curious about what might work for you, and to try gently, to try playfully, and maybe incorporate something like a breath practice, or maybe to practice labeling your thoughts, or maybe to introduce a relaxation practice or a mindful pause. And I believe that is it. So I have a few resources and links, and I will also be passing on this information to Katie so she can share some of the links that I like and some of the resources that I find helpful. And I will go ahead and stop my share. There we go. And now I can see all of you.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Roberto. This is a really wonderful presentation. I learned a lot, absolutely. We do have a few questions here in the chat.
Okay.
So let's see. So we have someone asking, what is your stance on the use of sleeping pills? I've always felt that most sleep issues could be mitigated with lifestyle changes. When would it be beneficial and what are some of the downsides?
So I would say that I don't have a hard and fast stance one way or the other. In general, we advocate use of sleep aids on a temporary or short-term basis. So I think they can be very helpful in the short term. Like, let's say you've just traveled. Using a sleep aid for a few nights to get your sleep schedule under control, that could be a really beneficial use of a sleep aid. One of the things that we need to keep in mind is that most sleep medicines, even over the counter, like Benadryl-based sleep products, they do change the quality of our sleep. They change the sleep, what we call the sleep architecture. And so, again, this is something that you might also consult with your doctor about, your physician, to discuss the merits really specifically for you. I think that many of the sleep issues that people experience can be mitigated by lifestyle. So, in answer to that particular question, I think there's a lot of non-pharmacologic or non-medication based strategies that can be very, very helpful.
Wonderful, thank you.
Mhm.
So the next question is there anything other than B12 deficiency that can cause restless leg? I have
Yeah.
a deficiency, but I take B12. Is it not enough or could it be something else?
That's a really good question. And as a psychologist, I'm really not prepared to adequately answer that. So again, that's probably one that you would want to discuss with your primary care physician or one of a sleep physician to kind of really explore, any other underlying um, problems for that. I do know even for thing, like restless leg or even any other sort of physiological problem that can interfere with sleep, including something like chronic pain, um, we can learn ways to tolerate and to learn to adapt to that. So some people take medicine for restless legs, some people choose not to, and they learn different strategies to essentially tell their brain to stop paying attention to it so much. So sometimes that can be helpful. But again, that would be a good question to ask your physician about.
All right. Wonderful. Well, those are all the questions that I saw in the chat.
Okay.
If anyone has any others, you can feel free to pop them in there. We have a couple minutes left here. I had one that I wanted to ask. This is a library setting. I imagine we have some bookworms in the audience today, including myself. And I know you say no technology before bed, but
Right.
what are kind of your guidelines with reading?
That's a really good question. Well, I mean, if we do old school, right? If we have a hard copy of a book,
Right.
that's no problem. So here's the deal. If you don't have a sleep problem, there are no rules, right?
True.
And in fact, even if you have a sleep problem, we don't want to introduce a strict set of rules. That's why, like in my clinical practice, I'm not really rigid with the sleep hygiene practices because many people interpret them as rules, and the rules sort of up the ante, and it kind of increases that tension of like, oh, am I doing it right? Can I do this? Can I do that? Can I not do this? Can I not do that? So I think reading, for many people, it's not at all problematic. I would say if you're using like a Kindle or something like that, like a reader, then maybe you would put it in nighttime mode or use what do we call it? The blue. the blue glass, what are the blue glasses? The glasses that
Oh,
help us to manage the light that comes out of devices. So I would probably recommend that, or go old school and get a hard copy of a book. And I do have a couple of book recommendations. There's actually, I'll put that in the resources. There's a whole host, even if you just do, say, a search of, uh, there's a lot of workbooks that are for insomnia from a cognitive behavioral standpoint, and there's just many. Um, and many of them are quite good. One of my favorite books comes at it from a slightly different perspective, comes at it from more of a mindfulness perspective, and that is called The Sleep Book, by Dr. Guy. Now I can't remember his last name. It's in my resources. I'll think of it probably in just a second as soon as I get off this call. Meadows. And it's a really nice book, and it helps walk people through step by step some practices that can be really helpful for reintroducing kind of normal sleep practices. But it's specifically for people that have insomnia.
all right.
Any
Well,
other questions?
I didn't see any others in the chat. Let me go ahead and switch that out there. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Roberto. That was a really great presentation. I can't wait to start taking my action step, which I will share with all of you, will be to not watch YouTube videos right before going to bed. Close the laptop, put it away. Don't have that on. So that's what I will be working on. So thank you guys so much for joining us for Better Sleep Tips. We invite you to explore additional resources on sleep health in our library collection on TakeCare.org and the National Institutes of Health. For more information about our health literacy initiatives, curbside pickup locations, and upcoming virtual programs, just go to www.saclibrary.org. And for the Sacramento Public Library, thank you so much and be well.